Hello and welcome to Free Hit, an FPL podcast. I'm your host, Chris, joined as always by my co-host, Jace. And Jace, it was, I would say, a fairly underwhelming double game week 28 for most managers. I don't know about this particular manager, but for most managers, a lot of disappointing results from Bournemouth and Luton players, Arsenal blank, City blank, Liverpool blank, etc. Just an interesting week going into Free Hit 29 and maybe not what everybody was expecting after such a high-scoring game week 27. How are you feeling this week?
Yeah, I would say yet, Chris. I would say it's so far, if you will, because we still have some games to play, and just because they didn't haul in the first game doesn't mean those double game weekers aren't going to turn it around in the second game, even though they play each other, which always adds an interesting twist to it. But yeah, I feel the same as you. I feel like we both came out all right so far this game week.
Yeah, that is fair. We are recording just after the Chelsea-Newcastle game on Monday. Still the Bournemouth-Luton game this week, which obviously a lot of highly owned assets due to the double game week there. I know I still have Doughty, Morris, and Solanke, and I think you have the same or at least a pretty similar lineup still left to play. So we'll kind of see where things land.
Yeah, exact same.
As far as the double game week, I'm curious, anything, now that we have a little bit of hindsight, 3 out of the 4 games are out of the way, anything to learn or take away from sort of like a disappointing game week, or you feel like it was just sort of unlucky that, there were so many blanks?
No, I think we were right last week, right, where we mentioned you don't want to sacrifice a really good single game week player for a bad player with a double game week. I think you and I kind of followed that advice pretty well, and like I said, it turned out well for us. I think the biggest disappointment is the Solanke performance because, yeah. I mean, wow, you slip on a penalty like that, and then you're called offsides for the most bogus of reasons. It's the whole letter of the law or spirit of the law argument. So I think if you triple captain Solanke, you're very, very, very unlucky. Like my little brother, shout out Tanner. Same with Morris. I know. Luton didn't look incredible, but there were chances there, right? And he still got another game. So hopefully both of them return. Not great if you have Doughty, but if he gets the assist on Morris, it all works out in the end, right? So, but yeah, I think mostly unlucky as long as you were smart about it. But if, like you said, you really went in on like the likes of Semenyo, Barkley, Tavernier, etc., you paid the price for it. So.
Yeah, I was going to say that exact same thing. I think it really proves this hypothesis, and something that I want to bold for us in our postmortem is, you don't want to react too much to the blank and double game weeks. If there's a good single game week player that you can get for a double game week without completely wrecking your team for future weeks, absolutely, that makes complete sense. But, here we are both sitting with Cole Palmer, for example, who was a sell before blank game week 26 for a Wolves asset. Cold Palmer. Sell before game week 26 for a Wolves asset. He was a sell before this week for potentially a Tavernier, a double game week asset, or, some people even sold Garnacho for Barkley this week, for example, which I considered as well. And the single game weekers end up outscoring, at least so far to date, the double game week players. So I completely agree. It's really about keeping a cool head, identifying the opportunities that make sense for your team, but not necessarily selling out for these suboptimal or subpar double game weeks, I think is the takeaway here. So yeah, I'm glad it worked out for us. This could all crash and burn on Wednesday after Tavernier triple return, but so far things are looking like they worked out for us. Before we move on, just a few FPL logistics. Reminder on fixtures for this week. Only 8 teams are playing, and Jason and I at the end of this podcast will talk about our free hit teams just because that's a very popular chip this week. The 4 matches that we have are Brentford at Burnley, Forest at Luton, Spurs at Fulham, and Villa at West Ham. We also, just as an FYI, have an international break after game week 29, and then a very quick turnaround between game week 30 and game week 31 coming up. So there's kind of a lot of deadlines, or regular deadlines, I should say, in the near future that you just want to be aware of as an FPL manager. One other thing I wanted to throw in just for reference, since a lot of people are playing the free hit chip this week, is that the week after you play a free hit, no matter if you rolled your transfer the previous week or not, you will have one free transfer. Just something to keep an eye on for this week. Any other comments on FPL logistics, Jace? That was kind of our bulletin board agenda for today.
Yeah, is that the same with the wild card?
Yeah, I believe so. After you use a wild card, you only have one free transfer after as well.
More you know. Yeah. No, that's it for me.
Awesome. Well, let's keep the conversation about game week 28 going and talk about our teams. I can see that you're currently on 43 points after Palmer's 10-pointer. That'll be 46 points after his 3 bonus points are confirmed. Talk me through some of your players and decisions that you had this week.
Yeah, that'll end up at 51 points after Garnacho comes off of my bench and the -4 gets taken into account, as I did take another -4 this week. But I've got Leno in goals. First time in a couple weeks. I made the wrong choice as my goalkeeper since Kelleher got 3, Leno got 1. So sucks there. But Doughty, Virgil, and Gabriel in the back. Martinelli, who will get subbed out for Garnacho since he didn't play. So sub Garnacho, Palmer, Son, De Bruyne in the midfield. And then an attacking line of Watkins, Morris, and Solanke, with Solanke as my captain and Morris as my vice captain. I also left Udogie on the bench with 6 points. So there's that to kick myself about later. But all in all, pretty decent game week. I got 9.2 million left in the bank and a green arrow so far. I'm at 1.48 million live right now, which is the highest I've been since game week 2. So feeling pretty good right now.
Nice. We love stacking those green arrows. You mentioned a -4. Who were your transfers this week?
Yeah, so I considered most heavily Doughty and Morris. If you recall, I made the Doughty transfer live on the pod last week. I also considered Muniz. I've been talking about him for several weeks. I didn't end up going for him because there's no double game week, and I wanted to bring Morris in because I thought he was the better option, even as a single game week player. So I thought that made the most sense. I ended up sending Burnout for Doughty. Like we just said, he's got a good fixture, good underlying metrics, and the double game week, of course. And then I sent Holland away and brought Morris in, took the -4 there. Again, double game week, good fixture, could still return. Holland, I didn't think was going to return against Liverpool, and then he's got Arsenal next. So I thought it was fine to send him away and see what Morris could do for us, since he does play in game week 39. So those were the transfers I made. Sorry, game week 29.
Game week 39. That's like the bonus game week, the secret level.
I'm sure he still plays. Yeah, I'm sure he still plays that game week, right?
Yeah, I'm sure he does too. You have a really interesting team right now. Can I just say that? Couple of questions for you. Mm-hmm. You held on to De Bruyne, and I think I was kind of in the same boat this week with Foden, where I was sort of torn between getting an additional game week 29 midfielder. Bowen was probably the guy because he was home to Burnley this week. You chose to ride it out with De Bruyne after a tough stretch for him. Walk me through that. Were you thinking about a transfer there, or was he pretty nailed this week?
He was pretty nailed this week. I still think he's a really good big game player. And as you saw, he still got the bonus point. He got the return. What a corner that was. I mean, wow. Yeah. Overall, great game to watch for the neutral. But I knew KDB was going to come good. I still think that if he would have stayed in the game just a little longer, there was that other return. I mean, he should have had at least 3 assists that I saw, where they either whiffed in front of goal or what have you. He had a few shots that were on target or just off. So I still think he's a great pick. Whether I hang on to him after the wild card is up for discussion later on in the pod, I guess. But no, I still thought he was going to come good. So fine leaving him in the team. I certainly didn't see points anywhere else, for that were worth taking another -4 for. So,
yeah, I think that's the boat that I was in too, where would I rather take an inform Foden at Liverpool and kind of roll the dice and save a hit versus taking Bowen, even though West Ham have been mostly pretty bad with the exception of their Brentford fixture. And I decided that one more week, some additional information was probably the way to go. And I definitely can't blame you for, sticking to your guns on De Bruyne, even though he's had a bit of a rough stretch. It was great to see him start. Tough that he only got 60 minutes. I mean, interesting decision by Pep to pull him off during that game, but a draw was probably a win for City all in all. So things turned out just fine, and we'll talk about that game a little bit later. Last question for you. After transferring in 2 Luton players this week, have you changed your mind at all on free hit versus no free hit next week?
I haven't actually made up my mind yet. I'm still torn. I've got a couple drafts pulled up on what my team would look like if I rolled and didn't use the free hit. And then I'm also looking at my free hit teams and thinking, am I comfortable with one over the other? I think at the end of the day, I'm still going to free hit because I like my route to points in this game week a lot better free hitting as opposed to taking a -8 to get 9 players on the pitch. And especially with the fixtures, how they are, I just don't know that taking a -8 is going to be better in the long run, even if, I say the double game week for later and it's a double game week there, right? Save the free hit for later. But I still think I'm leaning towards free hitting, but at least Doughty and Morris gave me that route to not using my free hit. So it gave me that option, which is really what I was more concerned with, is not being tied to the free hit if things went differently in that first fixture for Luton Town.
Yeah, if you weren't going to free hit, were you thinking about a Bournemouth defender instead of Doughty, or was Doughty kind of always the pick?
No, it's the same scenario, right? I didn't see a Bournemouth defender that was worth my transfer. Doughty at least has the underlying numbers, even if he's playing center back, right, and not bombing up the wing. He's still on a lot of set pieces and looks dangerous. So Doughty was really the only one I was considering. The double game week is really what sold me. If he had a single game week this week, I don't know that you don't bring him in, right? He's probably not worth the transfer, but given he had the double this week and plays next week, Doughty was really the only one that was nailed on for me. So
okay, and if we do a quick count, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 double game week, blank game week, 29 players right now. Yeah, so you're kind of like right on the cusp of free hit versus no free hit. Yeah. I hope that by the end of this podcast, we can help you get to a decision and see if we can sway you one way or the other based on the information available, which I think is going to be really fun for this episode. So I'm excited to talk through it with you.
I'm going to add guinea pig to my title card here.
Well, it was funny. We'll flip to my team because I'll talk about this too. Is I felt like listening back to us talk this week actually helps a lot with my transfer decisions. It's almost like an FPL diary where I'm sort of have the ability to go back in time and hear what I'm saying as I'm thinking out loud and talking back and forth with you. And I actually ended up making different transfers than I expected to going into the week just because of this podcast.
Yeah, so on the second listen, I felt the same way because I don't know that I would have brought Carlton Morris in if I hadn't listened again, right? And because I think I texted you too, right? Or you texted me, one or the other, and it just started to make a lot of sense. So yeah, it definitely helped.
He was the guy listening back to it that really stood out to me. Like if you throw the price points out of the equation, you have the 5th highest scoring striker in the game that has a double game week and a pretty good game week 29 fixture. Like as a non-free hit player, it was kind of between 3 fixtures for Morris or 2 fixtures between Holland and then a transfer to Watkins or an early transfer to Watkins is sort of what I was in between. And literally verbatim on the podcast as we were talking about it, I said, I'm not going to do it, but I think it's a good option. And by the time Friday rolled around, I was on Carlton Morris from Erling Haaland, which I thought was hilarious. But I think we made a lot of good arguments for him as a pick last week. So yeah, anyway, I'll kind of cover my team real quick here. In total, I'm on 57 points, also with Cole Palmer's 3 bonus points still pending, which as of today is a 19-point green arrow. The top 10K are currently on a 38 average, so both of us kind of outpacing the elite teams this week, which was great to see. I still have Solanke, Doughty, and Morris to play in their second game in the double game week, as do you. I captained Solanke, obviously on 0 points right now, And after the Holland transfer out, I still have 14.9 million in the bank, which might be the most I've had in the bank in an FPL season ever. I mean, that's more than the most expensive player in the game in the bank. My team this week, Ariola in goal, Pedro Porro back from injury this week with a 7-pointer, Doughty with 2, Bournemouth still to play, Branthwaite with 1, Cole Palmer with 13, Phil Foden with 2, Son with 17, which was a big player for both of us this week, Saka with 2, Garnacho with 9, Morris with 2, Bournemouth still to play, and then the aforementioned Solanke with 0. The other thing about my team this week that I think is really funny and probably why both of us outperformed the elite teams, it was, I think, more about who didn't score this week than who did score.
Absolutely.
Like I was just going through the list. Arsenal defense blanked off of that Ramsdale howler. Wissa came in, slide tackle into the net, which was an absolute gift. Watkins blanked. The 2 Villa mids blanked. Villa defense blanked. City blanked. Liverpool blanked, including Salah and Foden and Haaland, and obviously like both defenses. And Bournemouth defense through one game has blanked. Now, obviously, Bournemouth could get a clean sheet. That's well within reason against Luton, but overall, that was really what made the difference was those players.
Yeah, Saka specifically for me helped a ton blanking, right? Because he's so heavily owned. And Haaland is probably the second most important one that blanked just because he was so heavily captained. So I think most of the game auto captains Haaland, whereas the top like 100K, I think they were mostly on Solanke. So definitely helps. I know you were happy to see a Watkins blank there, and Foden again for me. So yeah, good return for us that didn't have those highly owned players.
Yeah, especially, I've had my issues with Watkins all season. I've talked about it. He's absolutely killed my rank, and he was one of the guys that I was considering transferring in this week and then potentially would have kept him and transferred someone else out to get Haaland back. So this was really my stake in the ground. Ollie Watkins, am I going to have him or not for the rest of the way, beyond game week 31, which we'll talk about. But based on my transfer this week, I think it kind of determines how I'm going to play through the end of the season. It's probably unlikely that I'm going to own Ollie Watkins in the second half, or I guess the final third, you would say, not so much the second half, but down the stretch run. Awesome. Well, let's get to the games from this week. And as we go through the games, we are going to kind of talk about fantasy recaps as we normally would. We are also going to talk about the free hit assets available from the teams that play in game week 29. And the way we've set it up is we're kind of doing 3 tiers. We have our locks. These are players that should be in every team. We have our possibles, which could reasonably be in your free hit team. And then we have our third tier, you could, but you shouldn't, which is kind of some differential players that maybe we don't fully believe in, but are conceivably picks for your fantasy team. And Jace, as we go through this, I will be interested to hear, who's already in your team that's in our locks and just how close we are to playing through game week 29.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that we get to start off with Villa 0, Spurs 4. Yeah,
let's go to Villa Park. Villa 0, Spurs 4, as Jace just mentioned. Before we talk about free hit picks here, again, from the podcast last week, both you and I have been talking about how good Son is at striker, delivers a 17-pointer on the road against, a top 4 contender. Should we be thinking about captaining Son, kind of while Richarlison is out? Because he's been in my team as a must own, but he might just be an auto captain, especially given Haaland's form. What do you think?
I don't know that anyone's an auto captain right now in the game. Captaining Sonny is a good way to differentiate yourself. I think among the top 100K, he wasn't even in the top 5 who were captained. So if you had captained him, you're making up huge ground against the elite players here in the game. So it's a good way to differentiate yourself. But again, I don't know that he's a lock. He's definitely more of a lock while Richarlison is out, because Sonny in that 9 position, especially, the first half of this Villa game, Uh, it was a little suspect, but again, we've been a second half team in this latter part of the season, and man, his movement was all over the place. He really deserved that goal, and it was thunderous. So, yeah, I don't know that he's an auto captain, but he's definitely a good one to look for if you want consistent scoring, because if anything, Spurs this season have been scoring consistently.
Game week 30, Luton Town at home, in addition to next week away Fulham. I might captain him in both of those games after the game today. Truly considering it. I was also going to ask you just about Spurs in general. I mean, this was a big match for you guys, kind of competing for top 4 and what will likely be top 5 for Champions League. But, for sake of argument, let's say top 4. Obviously, Villa got the red card. Did you feel like Spurs sort of overperformed, Villa got the red card, and then they piled on? Or was this truly a dominant win for Spurs from start to finish? Are their assets sort of in a different tier now?
No, I don't think we should look too much into it post red card, because I think more than Spurs turning it on, I think Villa kind of gave up at the end. I mean, you saw them on those last 2 goals. They kind of stopped defending, stopped following runs. I think they were pretty disappointed with the red card, whether it was a red or wasn't a red. That's a discussion for a different podcast. But, I think that we did a really good job going through the Spurs assets last week, because I'd mentioned Brennan Johnson was one to keep your eyes out for, and he returned again. Postecoglou couldn't keep him off. And I know Timo Werner, there was potential that he wasn't fit exactly. I'm not sure what the details of that were specifically, but Johnson comes in, scores, and then Timo comes in and scores. So really good work. Son did really well, but I think my player of the match for this game was Destiny Udogie. I mean, he played out of his mind, and it was a lot of intangibles and stuff that they're not stat keeping for, and not stuff you get bonus points for or anything like that. But I mean, he kept Spurs in the game. He kept that side on lock, and he was unlucky to not get involved in a couple other goals. There were a few touches he had in the box that just kind of got away from him. So, if we look at assets for the free hit in 29, I think Son is definitely a lock.
Yep.
I think Porro is probably a lock, but if you want to, again, differentiate yourself, Udogie is a fine replacement. I definitely think you need one of the two in your team, but they're both just as likely to score, I think, with Madison and Porro kind of going back and forth on those free kicks. So,
yeah, I also have Son and Porro as kind of a lock for the free hit team. Before we go there, I also want to ask you about Watkins, because we've had a lot of discourse on Watkins. I mean, you're getting shut out at home by Spurs. Was it just a bit unlucky, Villa just a bit off, or is this kind of a sign of either an improved Spurs defense or maybe a Villa who's already hit their ceiling this season?
It was the first time Aston Villa had been shut out at home since Emery took over. So I think a bit unlucky. It's not like they didn't create anything. They had their chances. Watkins was a bit unlucky because we have a really experienced center back, and then we have a center back who's lightning quick, and he couldn't get around either of them. Even when Van de Ven went off and Dragerson came on, he was struggling with the physicality of that game. So maybe he was tired, but there were still chances there. So I think more unlucky than anything. But yeah, first time they've been shut out at home since Emery took over, and against Spurs of all teams. So again, just speaks to kind of the quality of our defenders as well.
This is really helpful for me, because I think upcoming, what a lot of people are going to be thinking about is triple Spurs in the short term, both free hit and after, because they have some good fixtures. And like I said, whether or not to keep Watkins long term. Those are kind of game week 30, game week 31 decisions that I think are going to be very prevalent throughout this game. So getting these two teams to play each other at this point in the season, I felt like was actually very helpful from a fantasy perspective, a good sort of checkup to see where everyone was at. Awesome. Let's go back to the free hit 29 assets. I agree with you on Son and Porro. Who were your possibles? So not necessarily locks, but folks you would consider for your team.
Madison and Udogie. Madison back-to-back returns. He's getting more and more back into back into his traditional form. I think I texted you and said it only took him 6 minutes to touch the ball in the first half this match, as opposed to like 15 in the last. So Madison's creative. He's going to be involved. And I think if we didn't have the plethora of midfield options that we have, he would be a lock. But there's just so many out there now.
Yeah.
That's why I say he's possible. And again, Udogie, I think he's interchangeable with Porro. More people will go to Porro. So I think a good way to differentiate yourself is with Udogie.
Awesome. How about the possibles, or excuse me, the third tier, the you could, but you shouldn't? I'm assuming Brennan Johnson is in here.
100%. Yeah, he's the only one I put just because you can't keep him down. He's gotten a lot of flack this season, but he hasn't given into it. He's just played really well. He was electric down the side. He runs. He's going to be involved, and his finishing's getting even more dialed in. So, again, if you want to differentiate yourself with a second Spurs midfielder, you could put Johnson in for Madison. He's going to play. Whether he starts is, again, up for debate, but he's proven that he'll return even off the bench. So I definitely wouldn't go 3 Spurs midfielders. But if you wanted to throw Johnson in instead of Madison, I think that's a fun dice to roll, you know?
I had Werner in here as a possible, kind of with Brennan Johnson. It's basically a placeholder for whoever is going to start on the left wing for Spurs, and we just don't necessarily know who that is. They're kind of splitting the minutes right now, but yeah, not to overcomplicate things, I think probably Son, Madison, Porro is probably the 3 from Spurs.
That's who you're going to see the most of. Yep.
And triple Spurs, I think, is very obvious in the free hit team. You should have three of those guys.
The only wild card, big construction cone to watch out for here is Richarlison. Just because if he is healthy, it makes picking that left winger spot a little more difficult, right? Because we don't know if he comes right back into the team and takes the 9 and pushes Sonny out wide, in which case maybe Kulusevski goes into the midfield and Johnson goes on the right, or something like that. So just keep your eyes open, ears open for that press conference to see an update on Richarlison, because that'll dictate kind of the flexibility we have here.
Yeah, don't forget to call up ESPN Brazil, our number one source here on Free Hit
Tier 1
podcast. Tier 1. That's
Tier 1, yeah.
Right. How about from Villa? I think for my locks, just Watkins, I think is probably the obvious one. Actually, quite a few possibles from Villa, though. I had Bailey, Luiz, and then basically the entire back line. Pau, Digne, Moreno, Cash. What were you thinking on Villa?
Yeah, for me, different locks here. I think I agree with you with Ollie Watkins, but Douglas Luiz for me has to be in there. I think he's just so involved, and he's on penalties. So you got to have Douglas Luiz in that conversation. So for me, he's a lock. He's going to be in my team if I free hit. For my possibles, I said Bailey and anyone in the back line. And for my, could but you shouldn't, I think Martinez is in there for a goalkeeper pick.
Okay.
A little dark horse there. He's a great goalkeeper, and not a lot of people are going to go that direction. So again, just another way to potentially differentiate yourself.
Yeah, I had Diaby in the you could but you shouldn't, but I doesn't seem like he's starting. Villa played a back 5 this weekend, which was a little different, and Bailey was the guy up with Watkins. It was not Diaby, which was a little bit surprising. So, I agree with you there. Actually, the one I disagree with you on is Luiz. I do not have Doug Luiz as a lock, and he is not in my free hit 29 draft team. I think the penalties are a really good point, but still between him and Bailey, I went Bailey. But it's a coin flip. It truly is for a lot of managers out there.
My only issue with Bailey is, like you just said with Diaby, we don't know the playing time situation there. We don't know how that's going to kind of go, because the back 5 didn't clearly work as Emery wanted it to. I don't know why he chose this match of all matches to test it out on. Maybe just because he knew we were going to have the ball a lot. But yeah, I just don't know. I don't have enough info on Bailey like I do Douglas Luiz. Like Douglas Luiz is going to start and he's going to play most of the match. So that's kind of why I see him as a lock along with the penalties.
Yeah, this would be a great match to go back and watch some highlights from this week. It's 2 top 4 teams. You're going to be tripled up on both of these teams for free hit 29, just to really get a sense of kind of like who you might want for this week in particular, since it is a big chip to play. I think there's a lot to take away.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Arsenal 2, Brentford won. I mean, Arsenal has been beating the shit out of everyone and then finally got into this close game that really shouldn't have been close. I mean, Brentford created very little. We talked about the Wissa goal earlier. Tony almost had one of the goals of the season from outside the box, a great recovery by Ramsdale. And I thought he was in an okay, position, just an incredible strike from Tony. But, you take away those two, it was pretty much Arsenal domination again, and probably a deserved win. I did want to circle back on our debate last week about the three best Arsenal assets because I've already changed my mind. Like it was that quick. Last week you said Kai Havertz was the third best Arsenal asset, and he continues to start at 9. And I kind of agree with you. However, I think if I was on Wildcard, which I think you're going to have triple Arsenal, it might be Ben White. What do you think about Ben White and kind of recent
I knew
form?
that's where you're going.
Yeah, just his attacking output has been so much higher. And I looked at his underlying numbers, and it's not like he's all of a sudden generating more goal involvements than he was kind of in recent weeks. It just seems like they're ending in more chances for Arsenal that they're converting. And I think, we talked about it's not worth going from center back to center back. But if there's an Arsenal defender that's offering attacking upside, that's a totally different conversation, outside of Gabriel, of course. What do you think about him?
Good pick. Again, I think it kind of falls in that same line, though, as I don't know that I want double Arsenal defense, even though he does give you a little more road to points with the way he goes forward, just kind of like Kiwior 2 or Zinchenko when he's healthy. So I don't hate it. I still think my 3 are Saka, Gabriel, and Havertz. But again, it's changing weekly, I guess, for you. Yeah. So maybe it's fluid. But to me, those are still the 3. And you probably just default to where you have the least amount of players that you're worried about, right? So if you've got too many midfielders that you want to bring in, then maybe you do go Ben White instead of a Havertz, right? And just don't give yourself that headache, right? So I don't know. Arsenal, I think, have some decently tough fixtures coming up. So maybe after the City match, Ben White's a good place to go. But I don't know that I'd play him against City.
Yeah, not against City, but I'm thinking you're going to wild card probably game week 31 after City and Arsenal play each other. Then I think triple City, triple Arsenal, you have to figure out who the Arsenal guys are. And I would probably say Ben White for security of minutes, like long-term down the stretch. And there are just less good defenders than there are good midfielders. But yeah, again, if you knew Havertz was starting every game, then he's probably in that group.
Yeah. The only issue is with that line of thinking, right? Triple Arsenal, triple City, Sonny, you've got a midfield of Arsenal, City, and Son, and I don't know that gives you the diversity to bring in the points that you want, because points are more important now than they have been, right? Every game is one less game to the end of the season, and we're running out of time to claw back rank in your mini league and overall whatever you care about. So I don't know that 3 City is a must at this point, right? Okay. I do think 3 Arsenal makes a lot of sense because we know who that back line is. But with City, I think Pep is so fluid. I don't know that you need 3 City, but maybe that's a conversation we can have when we get there.
Yeah, we'll talk about that during the City-Liverpool game. I think it's a great point to bring up and kind of get the wildcard juices flowing this week. Yeah. But just to not get too far ahead of ourselves, Brentford is the team we want to talk about for game week 29. The obvious lock here is Tony. Did you have any other locks, any other possibles that you wanted to talk about?
The only possibles I wanted to talk about was a defender. Reguilón's got that hamstring injury.
Yes.
And it says 75% chance of playing, but a hamstring, as we all know, is 3 to 4 weeks minimum. So I don't know that I'm confident he's going to play. Something to pay attention to. And if he's not, is there a replacement like Rosselló Ryer that will take that spot? Because I think a defender is not a bad place to go, especially if you want to, again, differentiate yourself. But Tony's definitely the only lock. I think a Reguilón replacement is the next one you want to think about, Reguilón or a replacement. And as far as ones where you could go but you shouldn't, Wissa was the only one that came to mind because he's healthy again and he's playing in the attacking role, and he was really good for them at the beginning of the season while Tony was away. So something to think about if you want to roll the dice on a forward.
I had Reguilon as a lock prior to the hamstring.
Mm-hmm.
What I will say is that Thomas Frank came out after the game and said, minor hamstring issue, should be fit for Burnley. So we have it from the manager that he should be playing. And I think he is a borderline lock to possible. I think he's going to be in over 50% of teams just because the fixture is so good. They have the best, arguably the best fixture of the group, right?
Agreed. The only thing to worry about there, though, is a hamstring is a really easy thing to re-injure, right? So what would be devastating is if he's in there for 20 minutes, re-injures himself and has to come out if he does start. So just something you want to keep your eye on and figure out how much risk tolerance you've got with that pick.
Yeah. I also would not begrudge anyone for Wissa over Morris next week. Just same reason. I mean, Forest at home is a great fixture, but I think Burnley has obviously been terrible on defense. Not that Brentford have been lighting the world on fire, but if you're thinking Watkins and Tony, I don't mind Wissa as the third instead of Carlton Morris there. Speaking of, let's go to Palace. Crystal Palace 1, Luton 1. Who are the free hit 29 assets from Luton that you're thinking about?
Before we get into that, I just have to recognize what an amazing back heel that was.
Oh my gosh.
That Palace goal was, I dream about goals like that. It was so smooth.
That reminded me of the City one that Bernardo Silva had.
Yeah, exactly.
Like pretty much identical. It was beautiful. I couldn't agree more.
Great goal. That looked to me like I remember the Palace, that was a Palace goal. It was tricky, it was smooth, right? It was kind of from the streets, which is how I feel like they've been playing, right? So especially when you go back to all the great attackers that they've had over the years fill that role. So that looked like an old school Palace goal to me. So appreciate that. As far as who are the Luton locks, right? Doughty and Morris for me. Okay. I don't know if you've got Doughty in there as a lock or Morris as a lock.
I don't have Morris as a lock, but I do think I think Doughty's in every team. Yeah, Forest at home attacking on set pieces. I think he's absolutely in every team.
Yeah, so Doughty and Morris are locks for me. Unless you change my mind on Morris, which now I'm getting a little wishy-washy on that one. But possibles, Chong, he's come good a couple times if you got room and again want to roll the dice. I don't know who you had for your possibles, but he was the only one I had listed. I guess Morris falls into that for you, doesn't it?
Yeah, I had Morris, and the only reason is I could see there's a couple other third strikers, Wissa and Muniz, that I think are in kind of contention for this group. I could also see a lot of people going 3-5-2 this week as opposed to 3-4-3. So I don't think he's like an absolute no-brainer must-have. I think he's likely to be in a lot of teams, but I don't think it's a guarantee. And look, I mean, he has Bournemouth away still this week. We've talked about it for the double. Yeah. If he returns in that week, I would expect to see him in a lot more teams, kind of based on recent performance there. That you could, but you shouldn't. I had Ross Barkley.
Also had Barkley there.
I don't think he's one of the 5 best midfielders this week, but you could, I guess.
I've been saying it for 4 weeks. He's due a return. I don't know if it's going to come like an avalanche and he's going to have 3 in one game, or it's just never going to return. I feel like it's going to be one or the other, but I just feel like he's due a return. He's all over the place.
Maybe that'll be our poll on Spotify this week. Will Ross Barkley return before the end of the season? We'll put a bet on it.
We'll find out. Yeah.
Awesome. Next game, West Ham 2, Burnley 2. This is another 2 game week 29 teams here to talk about. And Burnley are so bad that I didn't even include them in this discussion. I don't think there are any picks from Burnley for game week 29 outside of bench players that you would really consider.
No, again, what a goal for the Chelsea loanee.
Yep,
right? Fofana. Man, I mean, talk about shooting from your hip. That's what Tony's goal would have felt like had it gone in, right? Albeit Tony's maybe a little more impressive, but that was a rocket. No, and I think we've got the same locks possibles and here where Bowen is a lock, right? I think he'll be in every team. Possibles Areola. For me, again, a lot of people own him as their starting goalkeeper, so I think maybe people will just be happy to keep him in goal. Could but shouldn't. James Ward-Prowse. He has a habit of returning all at once. There was that one match where he had 3 assists in one game. and he's on penalties. So just something to consider if you got an open midfield spot where you want to take a gamble. But those are my three. What about you?
I had Kudus as a possible,
Okay.
just because Villa gave up 4 goals this week. It's a little bit of
Yeah.
recency bias, but
Yeah.
not the best game defensively for them. JWP is in my you could but you shouldn't. I don't think he's one of the 5 best midfielders that you could have this week. And then Emerson, if you want a defender, maybe on the bench, but I don't think he's in this group as well. So probably just Bowen. I could even entertain Bowen not being a lock. I don't know if that's crazy or not, just given West Ham's recent form. Again, outside of Brentford, they really have not been impressive. So I worry about him versus, if you're down to him versus Doug Luiz, Bailey, and like Gibbs White, right, as like the other midfielders, maybe that's a place to go.
Yeah, I agree with you. Bowen's a lock for me because of the team that I've got, and I think he fits in there well. And again, he's one of those players that I think he'll haul if he returns, right? So I've got him in my team right now, so I'll stick with him. But the rest of them, he's the only one I see that make the cut for me. So
okay, we're about halfway through. Have I changed your mind on anybody? I'm just checking in.
Morris, I thought he was a lock, but the more we've talked about it, I think we're both kind of of the opinion that we wait until Wednesday and figure out if he returns against Bournemouth or not. But for right now, he's moved from a lock to a maybe for me. So yeah, I've changed my mind on that one.
Yeah, I mean, if he goes and gets like 5 shots midweek, seems to play well, not injured, I think he'll just be in a lot more teams. And I'm not even saying pick him for that reason. I think it's just more of like an awareness thing of, how differential do you want to go on this team? Right. If he blanks, then maybe Morris actually is a differential for 29.
Sure. The Kevin De Bruyne approach that I've taken, right? The same way. It's like so many people are on him that they're off him, and he actually becomes a differential at that point. So
Kevin De Bruyne was like cool and then not cool, and then like around to being like kind of cool and hipster again.
That's right. Trendy.
All right, let's go to the next game, the Amex. Brighton 1, Forest 0. Another return for Pascal Gross. He's not in our teams. He's not really in anybody's teams. I just have to, put my heart out to him. I hope he's doing well. I just want him to know that, like, I can't own him, but I just appreciate him.
Maybe he just needed a rest last week. I can't imagine why De Zerbi wouldn't play him when he's your only player that is consistent across every game of the season. I mean, that free kick was from a weird angle, right? But I mean, that was, where else was it going to go but the back of the net, right? Like the keeper was helpless, the defenders were helpless. So yeah, great return for him, and some bones too. So
they did have Europe. I mean, I'm with you. Like he should start every game, but maybe I think it was the week prior, and they lost 4-0 to Roma. So it obviously like didn't help at all. But potentially thinking about that.
But as far as Forest goes, I don't have any that are locks for me.
Agree.
Personally, I think they're all possibles. It depends on how you want to go. Iwoni, Gibbs White, and Nico Williams were the possibles that I had.
Okay, Nico Williams.
Quick cross king. He's one that late in the game is going to just whip a ball in there any chance he gets. He's like Ben Davies. Every time he touches the ball, he doesn't have the skill to go around someone, so he just puts it in the box. So dark horse there. Maybe he's more of the you could but you shouldn't piece. But Iwoni and Gibbs White were the two that I'm looking at mostly here for the free hit, with leaning more towards Iwoni than Gibbs White. But yeah.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, don't go Iwoni, because I was really big on him in kind of the upcoming fixtures like a week or two ago, and he didn't start. Like Chris Wood's back, Origi started, Gibbs White started. That was the front three. You need players that are going to start if you're going to free hit. I mean, that's non-negotiable. Gibbs White, I think, is interesting just because Luton are so open. I'm not saying that he's had a great season, but I think it's a great fixture for them. Mm-hmm. The other guy that I was looking at that I don't think is one of the best 5 midfielders for this week, but might be a good player for people that are playing through game week 29 would be Alanga, because you could get him in for Garnacho, which is one of the things I'm thinking about, without wrecking your team or like preventing you from getting Haaland or Salah in the future. I don't think he's as good of an asset as Garnacho, but his underlying numbers and his kind of season total points are, essentially the same. And it's about a 0.2, difference between those players right now. So I think he's kind of in the area of interest for me as a non-free hit 29 person.
Would you go to any of the defenders?
I don't think so. They had a 4.0 defender. I think it was Tavares that was playing, and now he's injured. So there's not really anybody else that I would. Yeah, Murillo is there. But
he's the only one that I had listed. So
yeah, Luton tend to score goals. I mean, they're not very good, but they do score. So I don't think a Forest defender. There's just better options this week.
Sure.
Next game's Wolves 2, Fulham 1. Who do you like from Fulham?
Yeah, so again, they're all possibles for me. And I'm going a couple different ways here. I just want to point out that Leno, I think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards him because he is the most in form and highest scoring goalkeeper available that's playing. So the only hesitation you have here is they're playing Spurs, who have scored in every Premier League game this season. So he's not going to keep a clean sheet if you play by the numbers. But only twice this season have Spurs been held scoreless. One being Manchester City in the FA Cup, which was a BS finish, but again, a conversation for another pod. And two was against Fulham in the League Cup. So again, there are a lot of caveats to that statement, but they are one of the two teams that have kept Spurs scoreless this season. So something to consider. I can see the arguments for and against him. Yeah. But in the form that Tottenham's in, I don't know that Leno is where you want to go as a goalkeeper for this game week. But my other possibles were Muniz, Robinson, and Bassi. Mostly Muniz would be the only one I would consider if I was going for if I was going the route of not free hitting. I would transfer Muniz in because he's got good fixtures coming up and doesn't break the bank. So he gives me a lot of flexibility for other players. So if I'm not free hitting, I will bring in Muniz. I think he was unlucky not to return in this game week too. But yeah, those are kind of my possibles, or Leno, Muniz, Robinson, and Bassi. I don't know who you had listed there.
Yeah. But. Well, let's talk about the goalkeeper, because I think Leno is someone that people will be considering, and you just kind of like look at the points total and you say, oh, Leno is the highest scoring goalkeeper. He plays this week. Like, obviously, I'm just going to pick the player that scores the most points in that position. And right. we said something about Fulham last week where it seemed like no matter who they played at striker, that player was a good pick. And I think what we insinuated was there's something about the system that they play that benefits the striker position. Mitrovic, Jimenez, now Muniz, like there are a lot of guys walking in there that are just good. And Vinicius, yeah. I think maybe this is Leno's second straight season of being a really high scoring goalkeeper in FPL. Maybe this is kind of the same thing defensively, where for whatever reason they're giving up a lot of shots, but maybe a lot of low quality shots. And Leno is having the opportunity to generate kind of excess value or excess points as a result of that. So I actually think he's not a lock, but I have him in a possible. And I think he's actually probably the goalkeeper I'm leaning toward, kind of him or Flecken. I don't know if Brentford can keep a clean sheet at Burnley, especially after they lost Ben Mee. Like, I just have to acknowledge that they aren't a great team right now. And I think Reguilon is, on corners, on set pieces, like he justifies kind of that spot. I'm not sure about Flecken versus Leno, just like given season to date.
It's one of those you're robbing Peter to pay Paul moments, though, because if you start Son and you captain him, then every goal he scores is a point away from Leno, right? And you know what I mean? Like, and you score 2 and it's minus points there. So I just don't know that you go to a goalkeeper who you know statistically is likely to not keep a clean sheet. And if you're okay with that, okay, maybe no goalkeepers playing this week are going to keep a clean sheet, then you want to go for the one who's going to save the most shots. And if that's the case, you got to find that fine balance of conceding goals, but they're only going to concede 1 and not 4, right? Like a Burnley or whoever. So it's just a conversation you kind of have to have here with yourself and figure out where you want to gamble at. For me, again, I just don't know that I can get behind putting Leno between the sticks just because I know the team he's playing.
Yeah.
And I just feel like we're going to score too. So
You could say you have it as kind of like you're capping your ceiling, right? If you have Son in the midfielder, let's say like triple Spurs, generally you have two Spurs mids and then Leno and goal. But I could also see that as almost like a hedge. It's like you're so heavy on Spurs that if they don't score, you have the goalkeeper that's playing against them as sort of a way to stopgap some of those points.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it'll be a tough pick for me to make just because, again, I'm biased for Spurs. But I also have Leno as my goalkeeper right now, right? Like he's already in my team. Right. So, yeah, I'm not sold on that position yet. But my other one was Flecken as well. So,
yeah.
And neither of us said him when we were talking about locks possibles and you could, but you shouldn't. So
that's true. Flecken should be a possible for Brentford.
Yeah.
I think he's definitely in the conversation. Ultimately, I think goalkeeper this week will be something that people talk about a lot and try and get right. There might not be a single clean sheet this week. I mean, you could be looking at 3 points for everybody. So I honestly, like you said, either you go Leno because he's the highest scoring keeper, or you go by the clean sheet odds. Outside of that, you're really just rolling the dice, and I wouldn't spend most of your time kind of on that component.
Even with the defenders, right? We're all leaning towards attacking defenders. Robinson, Udogi, Porro, right? Those guys, Reguilon, who are going to bomb forward, Doughty, who are going to put crosses in the box, right? We're not counting on clean sheet points, right? We're going for attacking points there. So
yeah, especially given the fixtures this week, and like Brentford has the best fixture, but arguably playing like one of the worst inform teams right now, and without Ben Mee, like I said, unlikely to keep it clean.
Just watch. Burnley's going to be the only team that keeps a clean sheet this week. Just wait for it. It's going to happen. That's how the FPL gods work.
This is my reverse jinx for a Tony hat trick this week. All right, well, let's wrap up. Let's talk about the non-free hit 29 teams because they did play last week. Most notably was Liverpool won, City won. This is, in a weird way, one of the least important games for fantasy this week, but obviously like the most important game for the real life Premier League title. What did you think of this game?
It was incredible to watch as a neutral. I watched soccer for like 9 hours straight on Sunday. So for me, it was just a great way to keep me energized as I was plowing through that set of matches to get to the MLS and the Women's Gold Cup. But for the neutral, incredible. Either team could have taken the lead at any given point. I think Liverpool were unlucky not to come away with 3 points. If Luis could finish, I mean, come on. I'd tell you that he's a must-have in your team after game week 30, so after the wild card, but he can't finish, so there you go. But yeah, just a great game all around. As far as FPL went, I don't know that it gave us a ton of information, but it definitely showed us that no one is fixture proof from those 3 teams, right? Which I think is important to keep in mind. I think you'd mentioned either in your notes or when we were talking, but just ignoring the price tag on Haaland and a lot of these big name players, because you think just because they have 2 digits in front of the million mark that they're going to return, and they're not always guaranteed a return. So just, nothing crazy. And we don't need to spend a ton of time on it right now just because they're not playing until 30. So, but yeah, great game overall.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention from an FPL standpoint, City and Arsenal do play in game week 30. So there's going to be a lot of maybe trigger fingers on the wild card in game week 30. I think if it were me, I would wait till 31. Let those teams play each other. Tottenham have a really great fixture next week, or in 30, excuse me. You should be fine. Play it in 31 because then I think it's a lot easier to double or triple up on the best teams. I kind of disagree with your point earlier. I think 3 City assets on wildcard does make sense to me. And if I were wildcarding today, I think it would be Haaland, Foden, and Ake. Vardiol, to me, clearly seems like not in the back 4. Like he's just really not playing. So it's kind of like Walker, Akanji, Stones, Diaz, and Ake. And I think of those 5, I trust Ake the most right now.
I had him listed on my top 3 as well.
Okay, so you would have him kind of in your...
Yeah, if I had to pick three, yeah, is Foden, Holland, and Ake right now. If I
Okay,
was wild
so we're agreed
carding,
on that.
yeah, yeah. Is that who you had? The three you had too?
Yeah, that's exactly the
Yeah,
list that I was going to say as well.
especially with Ederson getting injured. Um, I think he's replaceable with Ake because you get those
Yeah.
clean sheet points. Ake has a habit of scoring off corners and something to think about. So that's kind of why I put him in there. But I don't know that you can trust Pep to have anyone start consistently.
Yeah. You mentioned Ederson. I saw he was out for about a month, but I think we're better than this because, goalkeeper transfers rarely work out. I think some people are going to see
Yeah,
Ortega at 3.7 and take a hit, and that's not where you need to spend your transfers right now. Additionally, like it's a month in real life time, but it's only like, a game week or two in FPL
yeah,
time before he's back. So probably not worth the move.
no.
The only other person I wanted to mention was Salah. Salah was back, obviously subbed on in the second half, so still getting back to fitness. Looked pretty good though. Um, Liverpool announced, or Salah announced, or Egypt announced, it came from somewhere that Salah is not going to Egypt during the international break. So he's
Oh,
staying
really?
with Liverpool, which I
Okay.
think is a very big deal for his recovery.
Yeah,
You also
yeah.
don't have the risk of injury over the
Hmm.
international break. I rarely, rarely, rarely make early transfers, but I would consider if you're going to be price locked out of Salah going into game week 30, I think there's lower risk in an early transfer than there normally would be under these conditions. I'm not saying you do it or don't
So
do it. I think
yeah,
the
yeah,
risk
yeah.
is lower.
So you're saying if you got a free hit, but you got two transfers, Salah would be one you would use one of those on because you want to avoid the price lock, right? And you're only going to get the one transfer after you free hit, and you don't want to use that on Salah, right?
The free hit, you can't use the transfer, right? Your
Right.
transfer is void this week. What I'm saying is
Yeah.
you play a free hit in 29, or if you're just playing through 29 normally and you
Hmm.
plan to get Mo Salah in game week 30, you don't necessarily need to wait until closer to the deadline to get information because he's just going to be resting and recovering during that time off. He's not going to go play for Egypt where he could potentially get injured. And I know for me, for example, if I look at my transfer planner, I'm looking at game week 30, game week 31, I'm going to get Salah and I'm going to get Holland. If I get those two players back, I have zero point 0.4. So if Salah goes
Yeah.
up 0.2 and Holland goes up 0.2, I mean, I am right kind of on the edge. And I think
Yeah.
Salah game week 30 is probably the captain. So that might be a worthwhile risk, kind of depending on the team, to get him in early before any price rises that might happen over the international break. What do you think about that?
Something to think about. I don't know that it's worth the transfer this week, personally. I
Next
think
week.
if you're
Next
gonna
week.
yeah next week, if you're gonna wild card, I think you can get creative, especially with all the options that we have with lower priced defenders and midfielders and enablers, and in all three lines. Honestly, even in the goalkeeper spot with Kelleher getting meaningful minutes and Ortega as a stopgap for the next 4 weeks, who played really well when he came on. He made a lot of saves.
Yeah, he
So
did. He did.
to me, I don't know that he's worth a transfer next week, but you haven't steered me wrong yet, Chris. So I'll trust your judgment here. I don't know that I'm going to burn a transfer on him personally until I use my wild card, just because
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff I want to do to my team, and Salah's not my priority right now. I don't think he looked great when he came in
Okay.
the match. I know that he didn't start, and I know that he's not at full fitness, so something to consider. But I don't know that he's a lock right now for me. So I'm just not sure. I totally get what you mean by the avoiding the price rise, though. So if you're in that position, it makes sense to me. I get what you're saying. It's just not for me right now.
Who's your priority transfer in game week 30?
It depends. I don't know. I don't know yet, right? And this is what I was going to
Okay.
get to at the end of the pod. Is I'm still waiting because planning's great until two of the guys that I was going to bring in get injured, and then
Yeah.
it's like, do you wild card, right? Like if a Saka or a Salah got injured, could you afford to wild card in 30 or 31 and not have them in your team,
Right.
depending on how long they were out, right? Those risks. So I'm still not sure what I'm going to do, but I know that I have to get Saka in my team at some point. So if I had to give you a priority, Saka is the one that I'm giving you. Like I did the math in my rank, I would easily be under 1 million if I just had Saka in my team for like
Right.
the last 6 weeks, right? So he's my priority right now.
Okay. But Saka plays City.
I know. I know, and that's what I said about waiting. I'm with you. I don't know that you wild card in 30. I think that 31 makes a ton of sense, especially as long as you're
Right.
not dead ending your team for this free hit to the wild card piece, or ending it to not use the free hit and then playing on wild carding in 30. I think wild carding in 31 makes a ton of sense, and that's why I'm waiting because again, you could go early on Mo Salah, right, and use that transfer, and that's fine, but I just don't know how the rest of this is really going to shake up. And I'm planning on wild carding in 31 after
Yeah.
the international break. I know you just made this point about he's not going, so no risk of injury there. But who knows if Saka gets injured, right, or whoever. So I'm trying not to
Okay.
plan too much there, just because I know how this game works and I know how international breaks work.
I mean, early transfers are a risk, and that's why I'm not saying do it or don't do it. I'm just pointing out that he will not be playing for Egypt. If it were me, and we'll revisit this when we talk about your team too. I would free transfer Salah game week 30 and wildcard game week 31 if you're going to free hit in game week 29. That probably applies to like most teams because most people don't
Yeah,
own Salah right now. That's kind of where
right.
I would be at. I was going to say, let's wrap up the last 3 games unless you wanted to add something else to that
No, I
discussion.
was just gonna say I probably just burned because I went early on Trent and Bowen during the international break last round. Used my 2 free transfers, and they both got hurt right before the matches
Yeah.
and didn't
Okay.
play. So it was one of those where it's just not a risk I want to take anymore because that cost me a lot of points too. Because I had to take the -4 to bring Virgil in and all that stuff, right? So
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's
yeah.
that's a great point. Like that's exactly what can happen when you go early on transfers. I almost never do it. I'm thinking about it only in this very specific circumstance, and I still think that there's risk involved too, coming off an injury.
Sure.
So it's a good
Sure.
point. All right,
Yeah.
last few matches here. Bournemouth 2, Sheffield United 2. We talked a little bit about Solanke. I don't think there's much to learn here. Just honestly, strictly unlucky, and he could easily hat trick next game, right?
Yep.
I mean, did you see anything here that was like, oh, I shouldn't have done this? It's just hindsight, right? You can't play this game
No.
based off of hindsight.
No. Yeah, it sucks, right? It's unfortunate because it's like the KDB piece that we talked about a couple weeks ago where the numbers were there, but the conversion wasn't. So just unlucky. I don't know that there are any locks outside of a Solanke when it comes to like who you would even consider outside of Game Week 29, right? Who you would even consider bringing in your team from Bournemouth, right? Because I don't know that there's anyone that I would think of on a wild card outside of Solanke or even Solanke at this point, given the fixtures that are coming up.
Yeah, I don't mind, like we were talking about lessons learned. Like, I think the defender for Bournemouth made a lot of sense if you're free hitting in 29, like because you have a really good double, then they still have good fixtures after. I can't condone like transferring out a good midfield pick for Tavernier or a good forward pick for Semenyo. I think that's like where the mistakes were. But triple captaining Solanke is not a mistake. You're just unlucky.
Yeah. Good to see Tyler Adams on the bench again, though.
Yeah, great for him as well. Agree. All right, Man United 2, Everton 0. I see you asked here, is Bruno Fernandes back on the menu? Are you hungry for some Bruno Fernandes, the appetizer, the main course? Like, what are we talking here?
I want the record to show that Bruno Fernandes is my least favorite player in the Premier League of all time. I absolutely hate him, but you have to consider if United are scoring, he's involved somehow, and he's on penalties. He could have had he could have had 3 returns, right?
Yeah.
I don't understand, I guess, why he gave up the second penalty unless it was just to confuse Pope, right? Or not Pope, sorry. Help me out. Goalkeeper, Everton. I'm blank. Pickford. Thank you.
Pickford.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that why he would switch penalty taker, unless it was just to throw off Pickford.
I
or maybe
know.
Rashford just needed help, right? It needed a confidence booster. Maybe that was the captainly thing to do. But he is going to be involved, and they only have Liverpool and Arsenal as tough fixtures left, and he could easily score a penalty or a banger in either of those. So if you've got the room, want to differentiate yourself, Bruno's coming back into form, I guess. Maybe that video of him rolling around in the dirt lit a fire under him or something, because he looked different this game. I did watch it. I think Everton were really unlucky in this game, but I think you're right when you say Garnacho is an essential fifth midfielder because, man, is he electric.
Yeah, that was the other takeaway. And just on Bruno, I think he's not back on the menu, but let's keep him in mind for a double game week. I mean, he'll obviously be in the team if Man United have a double game week, but he could potentially be a double game week captain. And I think that was something Man United had doubles at some point last year. And it's with the set pieces and penalties in a double game week, I think is like a little bit more palatable for me to think about Bruno rather than as kind of a single game week player at the moment. Garnacho, I'm struggling with, like I said, this potential move from Garnacho to Alenga this week, and maybe I can't tell if I'm overvaluing Garnacho in the fifth midfielder spot. He's almost like Palmer in the fourth midfield spot, like just the amount of like excess value that Palmer is creating there. Like I almost feel the same way about Garnacho, and it's really like it's an eye test thing because he generates so much shots and like attacking output that are really low quality, but like my eyes are telling me like, wow, that guy could score a shit ton of points at any time because he shoots so freaking much. When I think about Elanga, again, it's like the underlying numbers are basically the same, but the eye test tells me that Elanga gets, like one or two chances a game kind of on a breakaway or a through ball, and Garnacho is getting 5-6 kind of chances a game. So I don't know, where do you see Garnacho? Is he like, am I overvaluing him in this spot, or you think I need to hang on to him?
I think you're 100% right. I think this falls similar, or at least with what you said about him being a fifth spot lock. I think it's very similar to the Cole Palmer conversation that we were having. Okay. A lot of people want to move off him. Maybe not a lot of people wanted to move on to Garnacho in the first place, but to me, he's in a very similar role as Cole Palmer. In an uncreative team, he is the sole source of creativity and effort, and that's going to turn into results in returns. So to me, Garnacho you got to keep. But if you've got Cole Palmer and you've got Garnacho, that's two $5 million midfielders. You've got three other spots to fill. Yeah. And who are those three, right? Is it Sonny, Foden, Salah, right? Do Cole Palmer and Garnacho allow you to have those other three? Because I think Saka, Salah, right? You got to make a choice there. And I think Garnacho is amazing coming off your bench, which he did for me this week, right? So, that's where I think you keep him.
It's Salah, Saka, Son, Palmer, and then like the fifth. I mean, that's kind of what I was saying about Alenga is he's the only guy in that price bracket that I could bring in as a fifth midfielder and not impact my ability to have the other midfield four. And again, his underlying numbers are pretty similar to Garnacho's, which I was a little bit surprised by, but like per 90, they're both kind of in like the 0.4 goal involvements per 90. The question is like, is it worth giving up on Garnacho? Because Elanga plays in 29. He would get Luton, and he also plays Palace in 30, and I would play him in that game too because Saka is at Man City. So I could hold Saka. He's going to play for 2 weeks and then potentially be on the bench like the rest of the season. I don't know. Like it's a 2 week. He has two fixtures versus Garnacho's one. Like I think that's kind of where I'm stuck.
If you're not going to free hit, I mean that decision makes a world of sense to me, right? And if that's the scenario we're in, I think it makes a ton of sense to make that transfer from Garnacho. I don't see anything wrong with it. It's not one I'm going to make because I'm not in that position, right? So would you rather move Garnacho or Cole Palmer on? Right? I think we agree.
Obviously,
probably Garnacho, right? Yeah. So I think there you go.
Yeah, if it's the extra player, maybe I just pull the trigger and go there.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, we talked quite a bit about my team and transfers. Let's quickly touch on captaincy, and then let's talk our kind of ideal free hit teams. And I want to, again, check in with you after this podcast and see kind of where you're at and maybe like what we could do to push you to hold the free hit versus play it.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking.
Captains for this week, I had three. Tony away, Burnley, Watkins against West Ham, and Son against Fulham. Anybody outside of those three that you would look past? Okay. Can you rank those?
Those are three I had too. Yeah, Tony, Watkins, Sonny for me.
Okay.
Those are that's the ranking exactly. I can see an argument for Watkins and Son, but to me, Tony is the best captain playing Burnley.
Okay. I think I have Son, Tony, Watkins. I'm in love with Son striker. Like
Yeah.
I can't help myself. He's just like such an incredible asset at that spot. So I'm leaning Son. I think most people would be on Tony though. I think that's probably
Yeah.
consensus. I'm with you there. Okay, you want to give me your free hit team?
Yeah. So right now it's at Flecken as my goalkeeper, Porro, Doughty, Robinson, Bowen, Madison, Son, Douglas Luiz, Bailey, and Watkins Tony, with Tony as my captain and Watkins as my vice captain.
Wow, we are really close. Actually, we're really close. I also went 3-5-2.
Okay.
I think that tells me something that 3-5-2 is probably like the route to go this
I think
week.
there's just more route to points there for me, given kind of everything we've talked about. That's just where I'm at. I still think Udogie is replaceable with Porro, so I may still go Udogie, Doughty, Robinson, right? But I've got Robinson in there because he does have attacking threat. I don't think a lot of people will go there, and he's my cover for. He's that hedge, that bet that I'm hedging with
Right.
With Leno that you were talking about earlier. So yeah, what about you? Where are you at?
I really like that team. Like I said, I'm close. So I also went 3-5-2. I also have Flecken in goal. So maybe Flecken is definitely possible. Maybe a lock out of our discussion. Porro, Doughty. I had Region as the third, but I can see with the hamstring, maybe you go elsewhere. I think he just offers a lot of value with the potential clean sheet at Burnley and set pieces. My midfield 5 are also Bowen, Madison, Son, and Bailey. But my fifth midfielder is Gibbs White instead of Doug Luiz. You can make the same argument for Gibbs White. He's on pens and set pieces that you would for Doug Luiz, and is a little bit more attacking and open play. I just think Luton is the better fixture of those two. That also helps you like diversify your Villa assets a little bit. I don't know that you want both midfielders.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I would say that with what you mentioned about Region, I would, if I have Leno in goal, Region would be in place of Robinson or vice versa, right? I won't have a goalkeeper and a defender on the same team.
Yeah, I could see that. And then I also front two of Watkins and Tony. I would captain Son and I would vice captain Tony out of that list. So that's kind of where I'm at. Okay, so that's it for our free hit teams. I think the only thing we have left to cover is what to do with your team. We were talking about this earlier. You have 7 players that play in game week 29 right now. You have 1 free transfer, but you're kind of leaning free hit. Talk to me about kind of what the plan is.
Yeah, I'm leaning free hit because, again, I don't think I can get to many of the players that we talked about in my team. And I feel like there are better routes to points by free hitting as opposed to transferring. Like if I went the taking the hit route and just playing my team as it is through game week 29, I'd have Leno in goal, which I've been on record saying I'm not a fan of. Doughty, Udogie, and Robinson is my back line, which is pretty similar to what I'd mentioned on my free hit team. But in the midfield, I'd bring in Madison, I'd bring in Douglas Luiz, and I'd have Son. And then I would bring in Muniz in the forward line along with Watkins and Morris. So again, I'd make those changes because they have better long-term play as opposed to the short-term value of the free hit piece. So that's where I think my team is right now. And I would still only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 players.
Okay. I disagree with you. I think you should play through it. If I were you, like you mentioned kind of like the players that you would bringing in, like you're just looking at like long-term value. I don't think you have to think long-term because you're going to wildcard in game week 31, right? So like we're looking at like 2-week rentals here for the most part. I agree with you that I would transfer in Madison for probably Martinelli. I think of this if you're going to go Saka later on.
That's who I've got right
Madison. Madison also plays Luton home in game week 30, so you have a great fixture there to cover. And then you're at 8 players, and you have 2 of the 3 captaincy candidates. You have Son and you have Watkins. So yeah, if you want to do like a Doug Louise as your -4 to get to 9, I think that's absolutely fine. And then you're at 9 players. You've only taken a -4. You keep the free hit, and you have 2 of the 3 captaincy candidates. Like that seems pretty good to me. And I think you're going to make up 8 points on the free hit later on in the season. I mean, if both of the 2 outstanding players you don't have blank, that's 4 points. That is definitely doable.
Yeah, like I said, the only issue is I know almost for a fact that Fulham are not going to keep a clean sheet, and I've got 2 of their defensive assets. So that's a 1-pointer for both Robinson and Leno if Spurs score 2, which is statistically likely against a team like Fulham, right? I've got Udogie, who we're also statistically likely to concede ourselves, and Doughty, who is playing for Luton. So there's no clean sheet there. There's maybe 1 attacking return from Doughty, if from anywhere, in my opinion. So I don't know. I'm just trying to do the math in my head to think where I'm better off at. And I just had 2 consecutive green arrows, right? I'm at 1.4 something million. I want to get below 1 million. That's like my goal for the end of the season. And I don't know if by not free hitting, I'm sacrificing that, because I think that's the big difference that everything makes, right? Is the chip play and how you utilize it. So maybe if I utilize it in a different week, it gives me a better jump on clawing rank back, because no one else is going to use it during a potential future double game week like we've talked about. I'm just pretty conflicted. So if you were me, you'd play through though, huh?
Yeah, I would. I think you're getting hung up on like non-optimal assets for this week in your team. And I think, again, what we need to realize here is that like no one has great keepers or clean sheet odds this week. I mean, I'd have to go look at Brentford's, but they're the best, right? And we both talked about how they're probably 50-50 to concede. So like I wouldn't get hung up on Leno as like the keeper in Tottenham, like, oh well, Tottenham's going to score. Like, yeah, maybe, but Leno's still going to get 2 or 3 points, and all the other keepers are going to get 2 or 3 points. Like there's no like obvious like optimal defense. It's like, oh, somebody's going to have double Arsenal defense against Sheffield United, right? Where it's like pretty much that's 12 points in the bank. I just don't think like the marginal utility for you of the free hit team versus your current team is particularly high, especially with a -4. And if you're going to -4, I mean, we talked about Doug Louise, but like you could go get like Gibbs White as your other midfielder. You could go get Bowen as your other midfielder, right? Like you could go somebody a little bit more attacking for those 2 weeks too.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I still think Doug Louise is a lock. So would you go anyone other than Madison and Douglas Louise, assuming that I don't bring Muniz in for the additional -4?
Yeah, I don't think you need an additional -4 with Watkins and Morris up top. Like I think it's fine if Solanke is the blanker like of that group. My optimal 5 were Bowen, Madison, Son, Gibbs, White, Bailey. So I guess I would have Bowen and Gibbs White kind of above Doug Louise. And if you disagree with that, I still think that's fine. Like I would still rather, do the transfer for Doug Louise and the -4 rather than play the free hit.
What are you going to do? Maybe you'll give me some inspiration. What are your plans for next week?
Yeah, well, I'm doing Foden to Madison.
Okay,
and then
that's a lock.
That's a lock. And then I think the second transfer, like I said, I was kind of debating between Garnacho to Alanga, because it would give me, I don't really want to give up Garnacho, but it gives me an extra player at a similar price that I can play for the next 2 weeks that does not prevent me from getting Haaland or Salah. Like the problem for me is that I could take hits to bring players in, but then I would have to take hits to get them out. And the advantage for you is like, you can take a hit to get players in. You don't have to worry about getting them out because you have your wild card in game week 31. And like, to me, that's like an advantage of almost like not free hitting, because it doesn't matter who you have this week. You can basically like reset the deck no matter what.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I do have that wild card and you don't. So maybe that's where I'll make up some rank on you, Chris.
Yeah, you've got plenty of time, my friend. I only called it the second half earlier, even though I suppose it's the final third, but there is a lot. Like most people still have 2 chips, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's still a ton of FPL to play. If we saw anything from this week, especially, like both of us did really well versus the rest of the group. Like there are a lot of game weeks left to make up ground. I don't want you to feel like you're in too much of a hole and then play a chip before you play a chip before, you get some temporary rank boost, but
Sure.
it might not be the best long-term decision when you already have 7 players. Like, you already have 7 players.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I guess you'll have to wait until next week to find out what I do.
That's a great segue. We'll actually be back in 2 weeks again because of the international break. So just a heads up that episode 4 will come out in 2 weeks' time as opposed to our normal 1 week schedule. But yes, very excited to see what you end up doing, Jace. It's your team. I want you to make your own decision, but I'm kind of glad that we disagree because I think it was a really great kind of like debate on the chip strategy for this week. So great. Well, with that being said, I think that's all we have. So just want to thank everybody again for listening this week. A reminder, please give us a rating, a review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your shows. And also subscriptions really help as well. We are also on social. We are on X, Instagram, and Threads at FPL_free_hit pod. And again, just a reminder, join us in 2 weeks to talk Game Week 30. Take care.